Do you have a paranormal encounter you'd like to share with us? Send us an email with your story for a chance of it being featured on Weird World. In this video, we explore two more spine-tingling ghostly encounters by police officers working late into the night, one in the rural United Kingdom and the other the rural United States. Both stories unfold in dark, desolate corners of their respective countries, where the veil between the world of the living and the dead seems to run thin. Writings on the wall. Once a thriving industrial hub, the north of England saw a devastating decline in its prosperity through the 1970s and 80s as the British economy shifted. The once bustling towns lost their vitality with the transition, leaving behind dilapidated farmhouses, mines and factories scattered across the landscape, symbolising a bygone era. Consequently, many residents relocated to bigger cities, leaving behind quiet, derelict towns. Being a police officer in these areas can often be dull, particularly at night. With little activity other than the occasional drunk, officers typically find a preferred spot to spend their downtime, as the two officers in this story did, although on this occasion they ended up with more than they anticipated. The officers were not only professional partners, but also great friends, sharing interests in music, animals, and astronomy. This made their night shifts together more enjoyable than they would have otherwise been. As it was a slow night, with no calls by 2 a.m, the officers chose to visit a secluded location for some stargazing and to observe the wildlife. During the night, it wasn't unusual to encounter deer, foxes, hedgehogs, and other animals generally wary of humans. Engrossed in conversation over a shared thermos of coffee and attempting to locate Jupiter and Mars, one of them spotted a flickering light in a window of a nearby abandoned farmhouse. Teenagers often ventured into these abandoned structures, so the officers didn't find it unusual. However, they knew they had to usher them away, especially if candles were involved. They drove silently towards the farmhouse, not wanting to alert anyone. After parking, they observed candlelight through a shattered window and heard faint whispers. Believing they had cornered the youngsters, the officers approached the window and peered inside. Unexpectedly, they found no one in the room. Instead, a solitary candle sat in the centre, surrounded by newspapers and books within a chalk circle on the floor. In addition to the strange sight, they were still hearing whispers coming from somewhere in the house. They decided to enter through the broken window, hoping to find the source of the whispers. The room was coated with the dust of long neglect, their footprints clearly visible in the thick layer of dirt on the floor. Graffiti covered the walls, the floorboards were shattered, and a musty, rancid odour pervaded the space. Driven by curiosity, one of the officers grabbed a newspaper from the floor, discovering it dated back to the 1930s, as were the others. The books next to the newspapers were journals filled with erratically inscribed writings about a man whom the author despised. The author even detailed plans to kill the man if he didn't leave his thoughts. Uneasy, the officer alerted his partner, who had made a disconcerting discovery of her own. The officer had observed the distinctive patterned wallpaper, an intriguing, flowing design that both officers found strangely mesmerising. However, upon closer inspection, the female officer recoiled in horror. The pattern wasn't a design at all, but rather more frantic scribbling. The phrase, "Get out of my head, Simon, I'll kill us both," was repeatedly written on all four walls. Feeling genuinely terrified and unsettled, and with the whispers still audible, they realised they had encountered someone who could be both mentally unstable and extremely dangerous. One of the officers shouted a warning, his voice reverberating through the old farmhouse. Immediately after, a sudden thump and gasps were heard as if someone in the adjacent room was startled by the officer's voice. This was followed by the sound of hurried footsteps, heavy breathing, and the shattering of glass. The officers sprinted through the house toward the source of the noise, and through the window they spotted a shadowy figure sprinting across the tall grass in the field next to the house. Launching themselves out of the freshly broken window, they pursued the figure, their flashlights illuminating the suspect's back to maintain visibility. The figure dashed into the waist-high grass at a speed neither officer could fathom. Abruptly, the figure fell to the ground and vanished into the grass. Assuming the person had tripped on uneven terrain, the officers rushed to the last spot they saw the figure, prepared for a possible confrontation. To their surprise, no one was there. A distinct trail of flattened grass marked the figure's path up to that point, and a patch of crushed grass indicated where they had fallen, but after that, nothing. The nearby grass remained undisturbed, and the officers would have noticed if the suspect had doubled back, since they were close behind when the figure dropped. Believing they had somehow overlooked the suspect's escape as they had closed in, the officers summoned the canine unit to assist in tracking the individual. Initially, the search went smoothly as the dog picked up a strong scent and led them along the path the suspect had taken, tugging at its harness with enthusiasm. As the dog arrived at the trampled patch where the suspect had vanished, it didn't pursue the scent any further. Instead, it sat in the spot, whimpering and refusing to proceed. Despite coaxing and urging, the dog would not budge, so the canine officer concluded the dog had done all it could. Disconcerted by the night's events, the two initial officers opted to search the house once more, just in case. Returning to the room they had first entered, they encountered something that sent shivers down their spines, prompting them to leave the house without further exploration. The candle, newspapers, and books had all disappeared, yet only the officers' footprints remained visible in the layer of dust on the floor. The officers and the canine unit had been in and around the house for some time during their investigation of the property and the surrounding field. It seemed impossible for someone to not only re-enter the house, but also gather all those items and vanish without leaving a trace. The most unnerving aspect was that the ominous message scrawled on the wall remained, seeming to continue whispering its haunting words to the officers repeatedly. They left the house and never went back, noting in their report that they had lost the suspect in the field with no further inquiry conducted. What mystery did the officers uncover that night? The answer remains elusive. Not long after, arsonists set fire to the farmhouse, and any secrets it harboured were reduced to ashes, forever lost. The girl in the lake. On a bitterly cold November night in New Hampshire's countryside, where homes were scarce amid lakes and forests, the darkness and cold were unlike those in the cities. This lethal, impenetrable barrier could claim the lives of those unprepared to face such conditions, and many had succumbed to its deadly power. Police had received a report of a young girl seen wandering alone near one of the lakes. Given the dangerously low temperatures and the risk of the child falling into the water and drowning, this situation was critical. In this region, the lakes were deep and murky, and anything that sank into them had little hope of ever resurfacing. All available officers in the vicinity responded to the call. 2 officers, both parents themselves, and determined to locate the girl, were the first to arrive. After a lengthy, dark drive, they reached the lake, hoping that the snow that had been encroaching for days would hold off until their search was complete. Upon arrival, they notified dispatch and commenced their search for the girl. With few houses around the lake and in pitch-black conditions, they cautiously navigated the undergrowth and swampy areas along the lake's edge. Eventually, they arrived at a small dirt beach with a clearing where the wind frequently churned the water, preventing anything from taking root. They scoured the area, inspecting any nooks or dark spaces where the girl might be hiding, but to no avail. As they searched, they pondered what could have brought a young girl out into the cold on such a harsh winter's night. Had she become lost, perhaps separated from her family during a walk? Or could she have been a runaway, even though no one had reported a missing child? As they concluded their search of the beach, the lead officer's partner tapped him on the shoulder and gestured towards the water. The officer glanced over and saw the little girl. Later, while recounting the story to other officers who had arrived, he mentioned that the sight of her had made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. She stood in ankle-deep water, clad in an old-fashioned white nightgown that floated just above the water's surface. The two officers exchanged glances, sensing that something was amiss. They contacted dispatch to report that they had located the girl and cautiously moved closer. She didn't react to their presence, so the lead officer knelt down near the water's edge, extending his arms to her as he would to his own child. "I'm a policeman. Come out of the water, sweetheart. It's not safe in there," he urged, motioning for her to approach. The girl turned towards the officers, her eyes strangely vacant, and began walking towards the officer. At that moment, another patrol car arrived, and the additional officers made their way to the beach, witnessing her advance towards the officer. Just as she came within arm's length, she disappeared without a trace, leaving only a series of small footprints in the mud. 4 officers, each from different vantage points, saw this occur. None of them could explain the mysterious event, but 2 years later, a similar incident took place, also involving a little girl in a white nightgown at the very same lake. She too vanished, leading to the legend that the little girl's spirit haunts the lake. The story behind her presence and why she seeks to remain there continues to be a mystery.